I have this last recording to do about these other paranormal experiences that we went through. And the first one is something that happened to me the night of my grandmother's funeral. Now, a lot of people in my family don't want to talk about it, or didn't want to talk about it then, because the pain was still fresh. And for me, it was extremely so, because I was very close to my grandparents. So when my grandfather passed, I was only 10 years old, and he was not even 60. And it was horrible. I was not there. I was actually away because I was in the Big Brothers and Big Sisters program, and we went out to a lake up in the mountains. And when I got home, he was gone. His wheelchair was empty, and just seeing that was a shock to me, and it really hurt. And so when I lost my grandmother 8 years later, it was even more so, because when you're older, you understand death more, better than you do when you're young. And anyway, that night of her funeral, it was not a good time. It was just awful time. It was like no one wanted to even eat or do anything. They just were depressed. And it wasn't like when my grandfather passed. A lot of people on his side of the family came, and they brought food to my grandmother, and there was a lot of people around. But when my grandmother passed, it was just like no one wanted to do anything. They just was wallowing in misery. And I remember that night we went to bed, and I slept in the bed in my great aunt's room, and she slept in the other one. And I remember lying in the bed, just very depressed. And she always had to light her stove, even though it was like early September. It could not have been that cold. It could not have been, because maybe mid-September. But either way, should have been still warm. And but she would always like the stove, because older people get, a lot of them have like I don't know if it's thin blood or what, but they get cold more easily than others. And so she had lit that wood burning / coal burning stove. But by that time, you didn't see coal places in my hometown, so it was mostly burning wood. And the fire died out. And usually when it died out, that would be it. It was just gone, dead. And I remember that night it flared back up, and it was like you could see the image of a bird flapping, like the shadow or something of a bird flapping on the walls of my great aunt's room. And my heart just jumped into my mouth. And I remember just being like so freaked out. I was peering. And remind me now, I was 18 years old. I was a grown woman. But I hid. I hid under the covers, but I remember peeking out. And I think my great aunt might have been in the other bed, but she was asleep. And she didn't notice it. And I did. And I was wondering. Now, I wondered later, but at the time I don't know what I was thinking. I was just shocked and scared, but amazed at the same time. And I don't know if this occurred simultaneously, but I found out in the morning that the alarm clock in the room that my grandmother had slept in, the same room she passed away in, and as a matter of fact, had just gone off at 12 o'clock a.m. and it just was flashing. And it had never done that before. It never did that afterward. And later, you would hear the sound of my grandmother's footsteps leaving that room and walking down to the bathroom at the end of the house, end of the hall. It was at the back of the house. It was not a very big house. And my great aunt, when my aunt and my mother told her about that, hearing that, she did not want to hear it, because she and my grandmother had not gotten along. In fact, they had fought all the time, because my grandmother had like a drinking problem. It's something in our family. It's one of those generational curses that run in the family, our family, substance abuse disorder, and especially alcoholism. And my great aunt did not want to hear that because, like I said, she fought with my grandmother, especially over money. And my great aunt loved money. She was one of those people who loved money. She professed to believe in God and Jesus and everything, but she loved money. And my grandmother was actually going to move out before she died. She was going to move in with my late uncle and his wife. And they had actually gotten the room ready for her. And then they found that she had passed, and it was like, you know, it just threw everyone for a loop. But she had been sick, you know, for a while. So, you know, that's what her obituary stated. She passed after, you know, an illness. And like I said, my great aunt did not want to hear that, you know, they were hearing my grandmother's footsteps. She did not want to believe that my grandmother was in that house. And I believe, you know, that fire flaring up and the bird flapping, you know, in the room. I mean, it really sounded like a bird flapping its wings. And you could just see it against the wall. And then when it died down, it disappeared. But I was so scared. I mean, I was just like, my heart was beating so fast. But that was nothing compared to what my mother went through after my aunt passed. My other aunt, not the one who experienced my grandmother's footsteps. She's still alive. Because before I go on, I had my other aunt, the one I said I had the little spat with during Halloween before she passed away. About maybe a month and a half after my grandmother died. And it was an overdose. No one wants to admit that in the family, but that's what happened. She overdosed. And she died. And but I don't remember anything, you know, like occult-like relating to her passing. She died. And it was, you know, another shock. I mean, she had a stroke first, but then she was begging her husband to bring her dope in the hospital, and he did because he always did what she told him to do. And probably deep down inside, he wanted her to go anyway because he was already involved with another woman. He probably deep down wanted something to happen and just, you know, would never admit that to himself. And well, I don't blame him because my aunt should never have done it. She should never have wanted that stuff, but she did, and she paid for it with her life. And it's a sad thing because she could have been there for her daughters. Anyway, so my aunt, she was my mom's oldest sister. And they had a different father. My grandmother was married twice, and her first husband died. I never really heard much about him, other than she would always say that my aunt was like, you know, women on his side of the family, you know, that had funny ways, which is true. It's true, you know. I'm not going to bite my tongue and pretend otherwise. You know, my aunt, she was something else. A lot of the people in my family, you could say, oh my goodness, what a person. I loved them though, but they had their faults. No one's perfect. And you know, she got bone cancer, and it was too late to do anything about it, even though they tried, and she passed away. And my cousin, you know, took over everything, and she had my aunt's phone cut off and everything because, you know, she couldn't pay all that, and there was no point in having it anyway. She had died, and it wasn't long after my aunt was buried. And these, like, mind you, these numbers no longer were in service. But my mother was getting telephone calls from my aunt's number. It was showing up on her phone. And she actually answered it because she thought it was my cousin calling her. And there was nothing but static on the end when she said hello. And she got scared. Because she was thinking, you know, how can someone be calling me from this number? Especially after she found out that my cousin had these telephone numbers disconnected. So she should not have been getting those phone calls, but she kept getting them. And every time she did, she became more and more afraid because she thought it was her dead sister wanting her, my mom, to join her in death. I mean, that was how she put it to me. She was like just so freaked out about it. I remember when I don't know if it was when she got the first one or the second one, but my mom called me and she told me about it. And I remember when I first went to Europe, one of the girls on the tour actually had, something that happened to their family, a similar experience when they were receiving phone calls from her dead grandfather. And he actually answered, I think, or maybe they heard his voice on the phone. I'm not sure. It was really strange. But I don't think I told my mother that because I didn't want to alarm her. But she just kept getting those phone calls until she changed her number. She actually had that number disconnected. I think she even got a new phone. And my aunt didn't know that phone number. So she didn't get the phone calls anymore. And instead, a family acquaintance. I mean, he's been an acquaintance for so long, it was like was part of the family. He started getting the phone calls, and he just laughed when my mom told him, I think my cousin actually told them that my mom had been getting those phone calls because he called her wanting to know what was going on. And that number's been disconnected for I think it was 2 months by that time, maybe 3. And he just laughed, but, it had scared my mother. And, it was really, freaky, a freaky thing. I mean, I never heard of that happening. I've heard of it happening, actually, to other people that I don't know, but I never heard of it happening to anyone, in our family, or I'm, very closely acquainted with. But before that, my cousin had passed, so this was my aunt's daughter. And she passed. They had, the doctors were saying, she only has 6 weeks to live, but she actually passed away, I think, within a few days. And not long after she had passed, my younger sister was there with my cousin. She was going to spend the night or something. I don't think she did, but she actually felt my cousin's presence in the armchair that she had sat in for a lot of her life. She would sit in that armchair and, smoke and drink a beer and watch Lifetime movies with her mother. And she died in that armchair, I believe. I don't think she died in her bed. I think she was sitting in the armchair. And she was really badly off. She had throat cancer and it had advanced so badly it smelled like rotting meat. Because I saw her and I was shocked when they told us that she was, not going to be with us very, much longer, because I didn't even know she was that sick. They tried to hide it from the family. I don't know why they would do that, but they had my aunt had her, dad's family's ways. That's just how they are. They were always closer to people outside the family than with the family. And it was just a shock seeing my cousin in that condition. I mean, I just was because she was such a nice person, and for her to go, to go out like that, it was just hurtful. And my sisters, felt like her presence, and even thought she saw an apparition of my cousin. I don't know if she was sitting in that chair or what, but my sister was so scared that she jumped up and ran out of that room. And I don't even think she stayed. I think she left because she got so freaked out. And I never felt anything. I only visited, a few times afterward, because it just wasn't the same, especially after my aunt passed and my cousin took over the place. Whatever childhood closest we'd had, we didn't really have it there, anymore. We just aren't. People in my family, we just aren't the type of people who are huggy feeling, want to be together, like that. It's a little different between, with me, my mom and my brother and my sisters, but, and my nieces and nephews, but the rest of them, the only other person I'm really close to outside my very immediate family is my aunt. My last remaining aunt, last one. And we just never been very close. We, years ago people would have family reunions and that sort of thing, but they just never did that, after a while just stopped. And we only get together during funerals. I remember, late cousin of my mom saying that. He said that's the only time you see your family when someone dies. And he was right about that. He was so right. And speaking of dying, I remember his mom passed. She passed away in hospice, and when we went there, I took my mom there, and but we didn't stay until my cousin, her son, grandson got there, because my mom had to go, home, and my sister, my younger sister, she was still in school then, and so someone had to be there to get her home, be there for her when she got off the bus and everything. But we were there for like maybe, I don't know, 2 hours. I remember how when she was lying in the bed, she kept reaching up, like she was reaching for someone who was maybe reaching down from heaven or something. And I noticed that right then, even though I was like a flat out agnostic, and all I could think was that she was seeing something like an angel or something that was reaching down to take her up to heaven. And I would think about it, every now and then, but I would also think there's no such thing as God and Satan, and I just didn't believe in none of that stuff. And I didn't really start going back to it until maybe about 3 years ago. And because of all these experiences, most of them, freakish. And it's like, God, I need you. I need you in my life. Jesus, save me. That's basically what I said. And I noticed some people, they'll supposedly become saved in their own, they're influencers, their own Instagram and YouTube and whatever. And these people, they end up turning their back. They end up going back to the world because it's just drawing them, like wanting plastic surgery and getting BBLs. It's like you can't be a Christian. I'm not going to name the person, but you can't be a Christian worried about your appearance like that. And worried, and still trying to hang on to what you had back in the 80s and 90s. You're no longer that person. You claim God is coming to your life and changed you in Jesus, and what? She used to post about Jesus all the time, and she doesn't anymore. I stopped following her. I don't follow people like that who are phony. And I know I have my issues, but yeah, these things happen. The phone calls. In fact, I started calling those phone calls the phone calls from hell. Now, here's something else that I need to get off my chest before I end this recording. But I had moved to this place called Shallot. They pronounce it Shallot, but it's shallot, like the onion. Within, in fact, there's a restaurant there called the Purple Onion. Anyway, we were living in this little dumpy trailer, and it was okay. It was a roof over your head. I'm not gonna complain. And sometimes I would hear 3 knocks. In fact, not long after we moved in there, something violently yanked out the drawer on this little table in there. And I remember being shocked, but I was like, maybe one of the animals did it. No, they did not. They weren't even close to it. And how could they have done it? They have paws. They can't pull that. It took a hand to do it. And I remember another time the oven door just came open, just opened. And I don't know if that was something telling me something or what. I tried to ignore it. I just ignored it because I didn't really feel anything there. But every now and then you would hear like 3 knocks at the back window. And I remember one time I was looking right at the window and heard those 3 knocks. And I ran right over to look and was thinking maybe one of the chickens got loose and pecked. But they were all in the chicken coop. So they couldn't have done it. And I was like, I'll be glad we got it here. It's just something following us. I want to move to California. I had wanted to move to California since I was 8 or 9 and met my cousins from Pasadena. That's where they lived at the time. And I was like, I just want to leave. I don't want to live in the South anymore. I hate it here. I don't like it. I want to move out west. I want to be in the desert or something. And so we moved. I mean, we had the money, and then get us here. We had found a spot to rent, and we was like, let's just go. And it was a good thing because here's another thing that happened while we were in Charlotte. My fiance, he had like what they call like a mini stroke or sort of a stroke or whatever. I'm not sure what they call it. And it was because he was taking these pain pills he should not have been taking because he was in so much pain from doing his job. And the only way he could get up in the morning and do his job was to take these pills. But he also was taking like sleeping pills at night, and for some reason he had some kind of like a like a sort of like a mini stroke, and so he was in the hospital, and I think he went in. Maybe it was Friday, and they let him out on, I don't know. I think they let him out on Sunday, because I don't think they let him out on Saturday. But anyway, I had to drive this big truck home all the way from Little River, South Carolina, all the way back into Brunswick County, and I remember passing by this area, and I was like, for some reason, I was thinking bad thoughts about him because I felt like he had put himself in that situation because he took these pills, and he really didn't know if they were pain pills or not. They could have had fentanyl or something in them. You just don't know. And I was angry about that, and I was just fuming. And I was thinking he probably should have just stroked out and died, and then I wouldn't have to worry about this anymore. I mean, that's what my exact thoughts. Right as I thought this, I kind of glanced over it. I don't know. It looked like there was a black entity just standing there in the woods. And yes, I sped up. I think it was maybe 45 through there, maybe 55, I don't know. But I went up to like 70, trying to get away from that area. And I only slowed down because I saw some more vehicles. And I didn't know whether, law enforcement would be hiding somewhere or not. Those redneck cops are in those kind of places. And that's a very, redneck area, Brunswick County. Even though with all those boomers moving there from up north, they're the same way. That's why they moved to the south and moved into these very conservative areas. But, for like Newark and New Jersey, and they're the same way. I've actually seen them admit that on social media. But enough of that. I was like, wow, I didn't know what that thing was. It could have been just my imagination working overtime or something, but it really looked like some demonic figure, like in a cloak, and it just freaked me out. And I was actually like freaked out by the time I got back to that trailer we were living in. I hadn't heard those like 3 knocks at that time, so I wasn't that scared about that. But I was like, I shouldn't have thought those bad things, but it still didn't make me call out to God, to come into my life at that time, because I was still like a flat out atheist. By that time, I wasn't even agnostic. I was just a hateful atheist. I was always putting curses on people and bad spells. And in fact, some of the people I put a spell on because they stole something from Jimmy. It was these people we lived not lived in, oh my goodness. We lived near them, and they actually got in trouble earlier this year. And I wanted to laugh, but I said, God, I'm not going to send them a letter telling them that's what they got, karma, whatever. I just, went on about my business. But yeah, that happened. I really saw that thing. A lot of people probably won't believe me, but it's true. I saw it. And I hope to God I never see it again or anything like it. I hope all that stuff is over. I hope it's done with. And if it's not, it'll just mean that the devil is still trying to fight to get me back with him. And I'm not going to let that happen. I'll fight the devil till the end. I'm not going to give up like a lot of people and go back to the world. I don't want to live like that anymore. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed, my little recordings of my terrible experiences and with the occult and the demonic. And I hope you stick around and listen to some horror tales that I'm going to be discussing, especially the Helly Weird series on my other channel, Dark Screenwriter. Thank you.